Hello and welcome to it. This is TJ Denzer, news editor for Shacknews, here with my associate, Mr. Sam Chandler,
G'day.
from the out there in the Outback. We
Yep.
are here on E4 Day 1 with Ape Tribe Games, lead designer and programmer, Erwin LaCoon. Y'all are working on Disjunction, which is a stealth action RPG. Can you take it? Let's just jump right. How are you doing, Erwin?
Doing great. How are you guys?
It is. We are firing on all cylinders here. We got a lot of things coming up this week. We have a lot of great interviews, and this is one of the kickoffs of the whole event. So at the top of this, let's just talk about it. What is Can you give us like the lowdown? What is Disjunction about?
Sure. So Disjunction is a cyberpunk stealth action RPG set in like a futuristic New York City. And during the game, you play as three separate characters who eventually team up to unravel a citywide conspiracy. And you can choose to play through Disjunction using stealth and being non-lethal, or you can sort of go in more guns blazing and essentially kill everyone if you want to. But the story will change depending on like your playstyle and your actions. And it's an RPG, so dialogue plays like a big part in the game. You know, there's a lot of branching dialogue and a lot of dialogue choices. And like any good RPG, we have a whole bunch of different endings based on how you've played the game.
And the setting on this particular game, it's set in a sort of dystopian New York City. Like even from the get-go of this, we get like a kickoff of like skyscrapers towering up above the clouds. What was the
city
decision?
lights receding?
Yeah. What was the decision behind setting the game in New York City versus somewhere else in the world, or even like a fantastical location?
Yeah, well, so we're from New York, or we live there anyway. So, you know, we love this town, and, you know, it's, you know, we knew we wanted to make a cyberpunk game, and so it felt natural to pick, you know, the biggest metropolis in America, and also just the town we're most familiar with. It's fun having like callbacks to certain neighborhoods that we're familiar with in the game. The reason we didn't make it a fantastical location or anything like that is because, you know, I think a lot of good cyberpunk deals with like contemporary issues. So like a lot of cyberpunk sort of deals with like wealth inequality or like terrible climate change or like the power of corporations or something like that. And so like cyberpunk sort of takes those modern issues and sort of blows it up by like 1,000, right? So in Disjunction, there's like awful climate change and there's pollution everywhere, and there's like the worst wealth inequality you can imagine. There are like shanty towns in Central Park and stuff like that. So we thought it would be fun to just sort of like take, you know, the New York that we know and sort of just like give it a horrible, like a whole bunch of horrible problems and like sort of play with how that would change the city. So, yeah.
And we're coming up on a time period where cyberpunk is a very popular genre right now. You've got, even right now, like we've got the likes of like Cloudpunk, which is like a cyberpunk voxel delivery game. You've got a co-op cyberpunk game later on this year, or later on in 2021 with The Ascent. And then of course there's Cyberpunk 2077 on the way. With that in mind, like what inspired your approach to your style in Disjunction? And like what has inspired it, or how are you working to set it apart from what's coming before or after?
Yeah, so I think something that sets our version of cyberpunk apart, something that makes it a bit different, is that it's more grounded in reality, I guess. So it's you know, there are no flying cars and there are no like super smart robots or anything like that. It's set in 2048, so it's not that far in the future, you know. So it's sort of like a grounded, more realistic view of you know, there is a version of this world that, you know, becomes Disjunction in 2048. It's not completely out of the question. Whereas like if you watch Blade Runner, you know, I love Blade Runner, but Blade Runner has like flying cars and like enormous skyscrapers that don't even make sense given the laws of physics or whatever. So you know, so we try to set ourselves apart by being more realistic and being a bit more grounded than other games or other movies.
I guess that's kind of a testament to the wealth of different styles in the cyberpunk genre itself. Like there's the gritty retro aesthetic of Blade Runner, and then you got the hyper focus of the digital realm and Neuromancer, and even a hyper futuristic style in some other types of games. But can you talk more about the specific style that you've chosen? Because you mentioned that it's not like flying cars or anything, but you know, like I know you take a train to to certain areas.
Right. I mean, there's nothing wrong with flying cars. I love Blade Runner, obviously, but
Oh, we all do.
right, yeah, everyone does. Yeah, so it's just like we wanted to just like, you know, some cyberpunk, like you said, is like Altered Carbon or something, where it's like, you know, people live above the clouds or something like that. There's like a real sort of like, there's societal progress even if most people don't see it. Whereas in Disjunction, it's sort of just like the world has essentially kind of gone to hell. Like it's not really dystopian, but it's sort of treading that line a little bit. So, you know, in the levels that you play in, there's a lot of just like broken like walls or just like decrepit buildings, stuff like that. It's basically a society that hasn't worked out, you know, basically for anyone. Even though there is a lot of wealth inequality, even for the people at the top, you know, society sort of just hasn't worked out at all. So I think that's sort of what sets us apart. It's just like it's not a great place to live, no matter who you are. And it's presented in a way that seems sort of realistic. It's like if everything went wrong, right? It's like if every modern problem we have went cataclysmically wrong, like this could conceivably happen, you know?
Yeah.
And arguably, like, one of the more important aspects of any sort of cyberpunk game is the mood that you build around that, and a huge part of that is sort of the audio design and soundtrack. There's a lot of electronica, there's a lot of synthwave that is sort of inspired by or comes from this sort of genre. Can you talk to us a little bit about like what went into the audio design and soundtrack choices behind Disjunction?
Yeah, so you know we have an electronic soundtrack, obviously, because you got it, because it's cyberpunk. And so you know we're inspired by like classics like Blade Runner for sure. But you know I think a lot of cyberpunk games go all in for the whole synthwave thing. So like they have a lot. It sounds very retro and it sounds very 80s, and there's a lot of like intense bass or intense drums in the background, something like that. Whereas I think our soundtrack is a bit more. It's not really retro. It's synths, but it's not retro synths, and it's a bit more ambient and a bit more moody, I guess. So like we try to set the mood with our music a lot, and so you know we try to. It's a lot more ambient and adds to the ambiance and the feel of it more than it like gets your blood pumping or something like that.
And there's definitely that sort of divide between, you know, this is a stealth action game, but you can also choose to be loud. How do you approach sort of reflecting that in both the audio design and the soundtrack when it comes to the player choice and how they handle a mission?
Yeah, so that was definitely one of the toughest parts of composing for this game, because you can choose to play it completely stealthy and really take your time and like not even kill anyone, or you can, you know, murder everyone and like be super. You can play it like it's Hotline Miami if you want. So yeah, you know, it was tough to find the style for our music that sort of worked for both of those approaches. So you know, in the end, we decided that like you know, most people will probably be at least a little bit stealthy. And so we don't have an adaptive soundtrack. We have a soundtrack that sort of is more ambient than a game like Hotline Miami, but still like in later levels, especially when there are more enemies and it's tougher, it's like it becomes more intense. There becomes a more like driving bass line or something like that. And so it sort of anticipates how players would play, but not really in a dynamic way, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely felt that the music kind of matched that hard-boiled detective, neo noir. You're out there, you're investigating, and it kind of sets that mood throughout. I really like that about it. The demo that I got to experience.
We had a lot of iteration for our music just because like it was tough just to listen to something and be like, okay, well, I can imagine this being good if I'm stealthing, but does it work if I'm not stealthing, right? So like there was a whole bunch of iteration on our music, and a lot of back and forth and a lot of fine tuning just to make sure it applied to all play styles, really.
This is true.
And going along like the themes and identity of Disjunction, the genre itself, it deals with the topics of self and identity, government control, and mega corporations, as well as drugs and sex. And we get a glimpse of that here in Disjunction. But like, how does Disjunction explore those main beats of the cyberpunk genre?
Yeah. Well, without spoiling too much, I mean, there's a lot of the story revolves around the power of mega corporations and the trade-off between like surveillance and liberty or whatever, like protection versus freedom, stuff like that. And so it explores identity. It is an RPG, so you have a lot of agency in how the story unfolds. And so you can, as a player, you essentially, you have a choice of, whether you care about any of these social issues really, or if you care more about, you can choose how you want to solve these, some of these issues, because there's a big conspiracy that involves a lot of mega corporations, sort of taking control of the city or whatever. And so you can choose to side with them if you think their approach is correct, because the game doesn't really tell you like this is bad. It sort of just tells you like, oh, like this is what a corporation thinks is the way to solve these issues. And so you can choose to be like, oh, I think it's better to live in a world where like powerful people are in control, assuming that they can actually control things well. Or you can choose to reject that and be like, no, personal identity is better, or like personal liberties are better. Or you can just choose to not really care and just like only care about yourself, and be like a purely selfish player. So I think there's a lot of exploration in how you can choose the way the game resolves, and how your characters, all three of them have different endings. You can choose how much you care about their individual stories and stuff like that. Like one of the characters is like trying to avenge the death of his daughter, essentially. And so as a player, you can choose to be like, you can choose to decide whether you care about that or not. And there is an ending of the game where you just like don't at all deal with that, and the game doesn't tell you whether or not it's bad. It's really up to you to determine whether or not that's bad.
Mm-hmm. And speaking to that sort of stealth and that mix of player choice, especially in the end level gameplay, a lot of games choose to different ways of tackling stealth and how to display and convey the information of AI awareness, or like characters that are looking for you. What kind of design went into the stealth system, and what kind of tools are at the player's disposal as to how to deal with that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of stealth games, they sort of they withhold information from you, like not in a bad way, but it's like if you're playing like an FPS stealth game, you don't necessarily see vision cones, or you don't know how loud you're being when you walk or something like that, right? It's mostly about like being aware of your surroundings and taking cover and stuff like that. Whereas in Disjunction, we don't really like hide anything from you. You can see all the enemy vision cones. You know where you can stand or not. And like you have it doesn't explicitly show you how much sound you're making, but you have a pretty good idea of how loud you can be in certain areas. And so the game is basically like, it's more of a puzzle game in a lot of ways. It's basically like, this is where you can go and this is where you can't go. You see enemy patrols, and so you essentially just have to decide when to move, where to hide and stuff like that. Like your timing is a big part of this. But each character also gets a whole bunch of abilities to help them do this. So like one character can summon like a holograph to distract opponents, and so you can like hide around corners better when you do that. Another character can shoot like a tasing bullet to just like completely stun an enemy for 4 seconds, so you can sneak past them or whatever. So there's a lot of different ways. There's a whole bunch of different abilities, and each ability has like upgrades that you can choose as you progress through the game. And so you can choose to upgrade your abilities that help you in stealth, or you can choose to upgrade your abilities that help you kill a lot of people. And so it's sort of up to you to decide how you want to play the game and how you want to customize your character, essentially.
Yeah, I really like that that kind of information was displayed in terms of what the AI can see and what they're aware of. Because yeah, as you said in some other stealth games, like sometimes you're just not quite sure. Like, am I in this enemy's cone of vision or am I out of it? And so having that information presented to me was kind of almost like allowed me to figure out exactly what I wanted to do in a given situation. And as I'm approaching an area, going, okay, well, this guy's patrolling this section, I can stick around here. And that kind of like design, like what goes into designing those types of environments? Because it felt like I had more choices. Like, am I going to go in loud, even though I was told not to, or am I going to sneak in? And so like, how do you map out rooms like that? Is it as you like, because you said it's kind of like a puzzle. Do you approach it in that way? Like, we want to test the player's ability to do X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, designing levels was definitely the hardest part of this game that required the most iteration. I mean, we were inspired by Mark of the Ninja quite a lot because Mark of the Ninja, I don't know if you guys have played it, but it also does a similar thing where it shows you all enemy vision codes, it shows you all the sound you're making, and so there's nothing hidden from you. It's like you know exactly, all the ways through a room. You just basically have to pick the one that you want to do, and see if it works out. And so yeah, when designing levels, you have to make it so that you can't just walk through it if a player wants to be stealthy. You have to put clever enemy patrols that look in all the right places at all the right times. So like it's hard to sneak through it. You have to put cameras that look for bodies if you knock out an enemy or something. But then you have to balance that with you can't just put a whole bunch of enemies to make something hard, because if you do that, then the player won't be able to shoot their way out of that room because there'll be too many enemies. So it's a hard line to toe for sure. You have to balance it for both play styles, and it just takes a lot of iteration. You just have to play through each individual room of all your levels and be like, is it equally as hard to get through it with stealth as it is to get through it violently, or a mixture of the two essentially. Yeah.
And like even in a small slice of the demo, we did see like there was some escalation as you first came across like just your standard guards with a flashlight, but then you start to run into guards that have body armor. Then you run into a guard with a straight up shotgun, and like how do you, like in a game where you have constantly evolving abilities, what is the design philosophy going into like the both the escalation of the quality of enemies as well as the number of enemies? Like how do you approach volume and quantity in this game?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, so that's the big issue. We didn't want to just increase the volume of enemies, because then it's not fun if there's like a billion enemies and you can't sneak past them, or if you can't shoot them. And so an easy way to solve that problem is you just make enemies tougher, right? Bigger, they have bigger guns, they have more health or whatever. Um, and so I think we design levels under the same assumptions that a lot of other game design levels. So it's the game will start off, you assume the player knows nothing and that they're terrible, right? And so you try to make the first few levels pretty easy with sort of simple enemies, and you gradually like ramp up how many there are, how tough they are, how difficult it is to overcome it. But then Disjunction also has progression, and so you become more powerful as the game goes on as well. You become significantly more powerful actually as you get more upgrades and stuff like that. And so it is tough to balance. Like you have to think about all the possible upgrades that a player can take for their build, and you have to think about all the possible encounters and all the levels that you've designed, and you have to just iterate and see if it works out. And so I think we have a pretty gradual like ramping up of the types of enemies, how tough they are, how difficult it'll be to get through them. But we assume that as players play, they'll get better, they'll get more upgrades, and they'll figure the game out really. That's not to say the game is easy. You're probably going to die a decent amount of times getting through levels. It's a tough game.
I did countless times just in the demo alone, where I was like trying to sneak through, and then someone else saw that I smacked another one of his buddies over the back of the head with the baton, and he's like, "Stop right there!"
Something really interesting that we've seen a lot is that a lot of people come into this game and they're like, "Okay, I'm going to play it totally stealthy." And they do that and they realize it's a bit hard. And so they eventually, they die a few times, and then they do a mixture of the two. They're like, okay, it's good to be stealthy sometimes and it's easier to be lethal other times. And that's how they do it. And then you have other people who go in, like as if they're playing Hotline Miami. And they also die all the time. And they also realize eventually that it's better to do a mixture of the two. And so like, eventually people just sort of figure out the game a bit, like any game, right? And so they realize that they're just like, different play styles are suited to different situations, which is ideal, I think, that people just use a mixture of the two mechanics and the two systems available to them. Yeah.
Because I never went down the lethal route, because I was really trying to do what Sybil wanted me to do and play by the rules there. But I did note that I stopped being stealthy at some point. It's like I got frustrated when I was playing poorly and the security cameras saw me and the alarm went off, and I'm like, damn it, I've been caught. But then I realized that I was still okay and I could reposition. So I started using that as an element to figure out puzzles and draw the guards away from certain areas by like, okay, I'm going to set this alarm off, so that's going to draw them out here, and I can smoke bomb and then taser one and then run in and smack that. I really like how that kind of plays into it because I didn't want to get caught, but then I started using those security alarms as a way of distraction.
Yeah, it's funny. People have been playing this game in a lot of ways we didn't really anticipate. And so it's like, like when you knock out an enemy, there's a body and you can hide it, right? So that other enemies don't see it. And we were like, okay, this is pretty straightforward. You knock out an enemy, you hide their body. But then like a clever player at PAX basically would move an enemy body in the way of a patrol just to like end their patrol. And so like the other enemy would just investigate away from where they were patrolling. And this guy went through the entire level, not killing anyone, just moving all of the bodies so that they would distract guards. Like it took him like half an hour, but like he didn't die a single time. He didn't kill any enemies. It's like a really clever thing that we didn't really think of. Wow. So I mean, we love stuff like that. That's like the best thing in the world.
So do you take that as like a learning experience and go, okay, well that's one way? Can we maybe think of new puzzles that involve that way of playing that we hadn't thought of before?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the bodies was the biggest thing, but the cameras is also one too, where it's like that also knocks enemies out of their patrol state and they start investigating, and that could play to your advantage if there's like a particularly annoying patrol that they're on. I mean, when you're designing a game, you always think like, oh, people are going to play my game like this because very clearly that's the way they're supposed to do it. But like, that's never the case. A whole bunch of people will play the game in a whole bunch of ways you never see coming. And, and it's a lot of fun in some ways. And, you always learn a lot from watching people play your game.
Oh, exactly.
And there's there's an interesting in-level choice in this game in the form of the checkpoint system. For those who don't know, like you have these nodes, and those basically give you a checkpoint on a particular area, but it's a one-time use. And so basically you have this choice in which you either continue to push as far as you can and hopefully get back to that checkpoint sooner or later, or you use it right off the bat and then you just have to deal with whatever you have on that floor. How did you approach that, like giving players that sort of decision where like they have this temporary use sort of save system?
Yeah, so something I love in games is gambling. I love the idea of like you can save your game now, but it might be smarter for you to just risk things a little bit more so you can clear out a few more enemies and then go back and activate that checkpoint. And I love that because it makes people like anxious, but in a good way. It gives you more choice in how you're approaching the game, and it just like, especially in a stealth game where you're already sort of on edge and you already feel like you're gambling because you're sort of like stealthing around corners, it gives you like another thing to sort of gamble away, right? And so it sort of just like raises the stakes a bit. But I mean, yeah, there was a lot of internal discussion about whether or not people would like that or not. I think in the end it's a good idea, and it adds a lot. It adds like a fun element to it that other games don't really have.
For sure. It felt like kind of another tool at my disposal to think about how I wanted to approach the situation, because I knew that either I've got a save in my back pocket when things get a bit dicey, or I can prep it and then know that I've got a point where I can just go through and try a few times.
Right. Exactly.
I really like that aspect. In terms of how people play different ways, when you look at the flow of gameplay, there's definitely an opportunity to determine the most efficient path and routes and like what abilities you should use. Do you invite speedrunning in Disjunction? Has anyone shared a playthrough of the demo that surprised you in how they approached it in terms of speed and efficiency?
Yeah, I mean, speedrunning is something that a lot of people are excited to do in this game. I think, for the first few levels, I think the fastest way is if you have perfect aim, you just like kill every enemy and you beat the game. In later levels, you can't really do that because enemies start being really tough. They like throw rockets at you and stuff that blow up. So it's like, I assume that the optimal way to beat later levels will be a mixture of both stealth and lethality. But a lot of people have been very interested in speedrunning this game. I think it's because they see a lot of similarities between this and Hotline Miami, which has like a huge speedrunning community. And so we're definitely planning on adding like speedrunning support. Like we want to have a speedrunning clock on release just so you can like time your runs and stuff like that. So yeah.
You mentioned it reminds me of what you talked about earlier with Mark and the Ninja. That also had sort of like a combined and also separate like speedrun category setup where people were going for like the fastest violent runs, the fastest silent runs, and also like a mixture of the two. And like it almost feels like that could also be the case here where like you could see people try different sort of like build different categories around this in which like maybe there's an optimal silent run, maybe there's an optimal loud run, or maybe there's like an optimal run in which like I don't know. I can see speedrunners are crazy, and I can actually see them like even factoring in things such as which choices make the shortest dialogue between.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, I mean the thing is, I mean I hope that people will care enough to speedrun it in different ways. But the thing is, like, we're also gonna have like achievements where it's like beat the whole game without killing anyone, or beat the whole game and kill everyone, something like that. So we'll sort of incentivize people to play it in different ways and see how it plays, depending on their styles. And people love achievements, so there's incentive there to get them.
Yeah, and one thing I was pleasantly surprised to see, like when like inside and outside the mission, you have like your choices whether you're going to be loud or quiet, and then on the outside of the mission you have dialogue choices. But one thing I was pleasantly surprised to see is that there was a little bit of narrative that like reflected the way I went through a mission. Like Sybil actually spoke to the fact that you were quiet in a particular area, and I'm curious, will that be sort of like an adaptive narrative that goes through the game based on how you play inside the levels?
Yeah, so that's actually a huge part of the game, because from a gameplay perspective, we love the idea of you get to choose how you play the game, you get to choose whether to be stealthy or lethal. But from a narrative perspective, it's really a lot of fun if your choices actually matter in a way that isn't just for you, right? So like if someone tells you specifically don't kill anyone and you choose to do it anyway, it's great in a game. I love it in RPGs where there's reaction to that and there's a reactivity, and your choices actually have consequences. So I don't want to spoil things too much, but yeah, you were talking to Sybil and she told you not to kill anyone. And so if you kill everyone in the first level and if you kill everyone in the second level, she does not talk to you for the rest of the game. You,
Oh wow.
yeah, it's you get a completely different series of events that unfold. And so, at the end of the game, based on how you've played through the levels, if you've killed every enemy in the level, you will get a significantly different ending than if you've killed no one. And the game doesn't really tell you whether that's bad or not. It's sort of up to you, right? You don't get like the bad ending versus the good ending. You just get the ending that is realistic based on what you've done, right? Some people will care that you murdered everyone. Some people won't care at all that you've murdered everyone. So, yeah.
And I do want to speak to the fact for just a moment that like a game like Disjunction comes at a time where there is indeed an obvious staple of cyberpunk is a sort of unrest, dystopian distrust, a corruption, and like this idea of human identity and freedom. And interestingly enough, this game comes at a time when there is sort of like real life unrest and distrust out there. In the development of like narratives and style and Disjunction, do you push out the real world to focus in here and tell the story inside its own bubble, or do you feel like something like what's going on out there seeps into your design and narrative choices here?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to be. I mean, when you're making a dystopian game, it's hard not to be influenced by bad things that you see in the world around you, right? I mean, we try not to be like too overt about things. We try not to be like, oh, this is this in the real world. We try not to be like overtly political or anything like that. But it's hard to not take some influence from what you see around you, obviously. And so I think people will see a lot of parallels in a lot of things. A lot of things that we didn't really intend to draw parallels to, right? It's like we started writing this game 3 years ago when a lot of this, a lot of the conversations we're having now weren't really at the forefront of the news back then. But like, there's a lot of parallels anyway, and so there's going to be a lot of things that you're going to read in the game or experience in the game, and you'll be like, well, that's pretty relevant, even if we didn't intend for it to be at the time consciously.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of art and games as an art medium, being able to tell stories, and people can either relate it to their own lives or look at the world through that lens and be like, what can I learn about the world from what I've just played.
Yeah, exactly. And I think especially since like it's a game with choices, it'll be interesting because like the player will be presented with, you know, these things that are seemingly problems, and they can choose, you know, how they think the world should solve them. I guess I don't want to spoil too much. It's hard for me to get into specifics without spoiling things, but you know, players will basically have hard choices to make in the game, and it'll tackle problems we have in real life. So it'll be interesting to see how people respond to the choices that they're given.
Yeah. So do you have like the analytics on the back end so that you can have a look to see how people, what choices people made? And, you know, because I'm really interested in those kind of stats, like X amount of people chose to do this particular outcome.
Yeah, we don't have it implemented currently. It's something we've talked about a lot, and we definitely want to have that in if we have time. I mean, we're gonna have achievements, so we'll know like how many people played the game and killed everyone, or how many people played the game and didn't kill anyone, right? And like for each major choice, there's an achievement, so we'll know that. It would be great to have like more detailed and granular analytics, just so we know exactly the choices people made, but we don't have that implemented currently.
Yeah, right on.
And you've announced that Disjunction is coming to PC on Steam, Xbox One, PS4, and Nintendo Switch. Is everything releasing at the same time?
That is the current plan, yes.
What's it been like developing on 4 different platforms for this game?
Tough and a learning experience. We're a very small team. I mean, we have someone helping us out for the console development, but like we're still a very small team, and it's obviously a lot of work. This is our first commercial game, so there's a lot of learning involved. But you know, it's fun. It's both fun and stressful, like any game development, really.
For sure.
I think I'm not too sure if we touched on it, but the art style, the pixel art style, like it's beautiful. Can you talk about designing that? Like everything handcrafted? What's the situation there? Because it looks beautiful.
Yeah, it's all handcrafted pixel art. Yeah, we hired. It's actually a freelancer who does our art, because none of the core team are artists actually. So all the art is from freelancers, and it added so much to like the setting and the ambiance, you know, because it's one thing to describe with words what you're imagining. It's something else entirely to like see it realized, you know, before your eyes. And I think it does a really good job of conveying like the sort of like, it's futuristic, it's cyberpunk, but it's like things are decaying, things are a little bit falling apart. You know, a lot of the art, there's like broken walls, you know, like broken down appliances. It looks a little run down. And so, yeah, I mean, we love pixel art. So it really just fit, it fit the aesthetic. Plus it's a bit retro, and people, you know, cyberpunk retro stuff is, you know, we love that as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I just wanted to talk a bit about like the actual upgrading characters, upgrading your character in game, because a lot of games do have skill trees, but I felt like the skill tree or the talent trees in Disjunction were a little bit different. Like they gave me abilities that I would want to use that were very critical to the gameplay. Can you talk about like how you go about?
Oh, I think my audio cut out there. Can you repeat that question?
I think we had technical difficulties with Sam, but like continuing from where he left off. Are you still there?
Zoom just crashed. Yeah, sorry, Zoom just crashed right in the middle. Look, like, it wouldn't be a meeting if Zoom didn't crash.
Of course not. Yeah.
Yeah.
But continuing from where Sam left off, you have like those core abilities that you use that are sort of like your utility abilities. You can level them up in different ways. And then, as you mentioned before, you're going to be playing as different characters that I would assume will probably have their own core abilities. Like, how do you approach that with these different characters, their different like lethality and stealth upgrades, and just like what they can do?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so each character, there are 3 characters. Each character has 4 unique abilities, and so there are 2 trees, like progression trees in Disjunction. There's an upgrade tree, where for each of your abilities you can choose between 2 upgrades, and then there's a talent tree, which gives you like passive bonuses to your stats. So like you can increase your movement speed while stealthing, or you can increase like your range damage, for example. And so there's a lot of, and you can also respec between levels at any time, because we didn't want to like lock people into a play style where it's like you take increased stealth speed and then realize that you don't like stealthing, right? So between levels, you can respec your character essentially. You can like re-choose your choices. And so there's a lot of flexibility in how you design your character, because, you know, if you find yourself like stealthing a lot, and you like the ability that like spawns a hologram to distract enemies, you can take an improved version of that it makes noise and attracts more enemies to its location. Or if you decide that you much prefer being super aggressive, there's an upgrade to a charge ability that like makes you deal more damage and run faster after you use it. And so like it's a much different way of playing the game. It's becomes much more fast paced compared to like being more stealthy. And so there's a lot of flexibility in how you can customize your character. And you can always choose to go back and spec a different way if you decided that playstyle was really not what you wanted to do.
My partner was recently playing through Prey, the 2017 game, and so with the upgrades there, the neuro mods are actually scattered out the level they have to go and find. And in Disjunction, you've got the upgrade kits scattered around the level. I really like that because it seems like what was the design decision behind that? Because it seems as if you are inviting the player to search more thoroughly and maybe test them in a specific way where maybe like if it's too challenging one way or the other, if it's too challenging, they can hunt out these upgrade kits to improve their character, or they can risk it and just see how far they can push through without it. What's the kind of design ethos there?
Yeah, I mean, Prey's awesome. So there was some influence taken there for sure. But yeah, the design ethos was basically like we have, especially in later levels, the levels become bigger and they become more non-linear. So it's not really like a straight path. You can explore and you can find things like, you can find more ammo, you can find health packs, stuff like that. And we wanted this thing where you have to look for upgrade kits. So it's not a sure guaranteed thing that your character will improve between missions, right? It's like if you don't get these upgrade kits, then you can't choose upgrades and your character won't improve that much. And so it's sort of a thing where you can gamble. You can be like, oh, this level is tough or whatever, and I don't want to find the upgrade kit for the next level, but it puts you in a worse position for later levels. And so it's sort of just, it gives you an incentive to fully explore levels, to get through all the encounters and just to find all the things you can find, because it'll put you in a better position later on. It's short-term versus long-term thinking, which is something that you always play with in video games.
Mm-hmm.
And Disjunction is currently slated for launch later in 2020, right?
Yep.
It's being published by Sold Out. How's it been like? Obviously, we're at a time when logistics on a lot of things have been sort of limited due to the pandemic going on right now. What has it been like to be an indie developer, like building this game that you've been working on for years upon years, and finally come up to your release date in this particularly challenging time?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously something that no one could have seen coming, and we still don't really know what it means to release a game during this pandemic. I mean, in terms of our productivity, yeah, our team all worked from home. We all worked remotely before this pandemic started. So like we haven't really been affected that much by this pandemic. I mean, we're based in New York, so it's been mentally stressful the same way it's been stressful for everyone, really. But I don't think our productivity has really changed that much. In terms of releasing, yeah, it's weird. I mean, we don't really know what to expect for how our release will go during a pandemic versus not a pandemic. It seems that people are playing games just like they used to play games before anyway. So we don't expect there to be like a huge shift in our previous expectations. But I mean, I guess we'll find out. I'll let you know.
For sure. All right. Well, I think we're coming up against the end of this. Sam, do you have anything else?
No, I mean, just thanks, Owen, for coming out and chatting. Really, like I'm really looking forward to seeing. So, slated for 2020. Do we have a window or a date?
We plan to release this summer. We don't have an exact date set in stone yet, but we'll announce that in the next few weeks.
Well, for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Erwin Lacoon of Ape Shop Games. This has been Disjunction. Thank you so much for talking with us. Day one of E4. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing more out of this game.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it.